with us expert, Steve Van Tile. So Steve is the community manager for Academic Data Science Alliance. And before joining ADSA, he was in various digital repository librarian, research data librarian, and computer science librarian at Oregon State University and Carnegie Mellon University. In this previous life, he was an active member of the Canberra community and helping to coordinate resources for and development of the Hydrix repository solution bundle. Steve was trained as an ecologist at Colorado's College and Oregon State University, has worked for many years with the U.S. Forest Service, reaching the effects of natural and human disturbance on terrestrial carbon cycles. And you like to bake bread and run far. And Steve is also willing to take questions throughout the talk, so please feel free to unmute and ask a question or put it in the chat and say that you'd like to speak up, and we'll monitor the chat as well. So Steve, I hand it off to you. And you are muted.
I'm always muted. Okay, let me figure out where to share from. 1 second.
On my screen, it's at the bottom.
Yep.
Green box.
So I assume you're seeing some slides.
Yep, you're sharing them.
Lovely. Well, thanks for the introduction. I'm not sure if I heard that correctly, that you may have referred to me as an ethics expert, which I'm not. But I'm going to talk about the topic of ethics in data science. I'll give a quick introduction to the Academic Data Science Alliance, because we're pretty new as an organization, and it's probably helpful to give a little bit of background, and then I'll talk about the data science ethos lifecycle tool that we're building with our colleagues in the community. So again, I'm Steve Van Tile. I'm the community manager with the Academic Data Science Alliance. So who are we? Academic Data Science Alliance is a relatively new, about 3-year-old community building organization. It's sort of an emerging professional organization that supports university research in their efforts to learn, use, and teach data-intensive methodologies and responsible applications. So we are a community of data scientists and data science administrators is maybe one way to put it. So people who are like in charge of data science institutes or departments or colleges at academic institutions. And we bring that community together to talk about, the issues of the day in data science and academia. So one of those issues is ethics, and we're going to talk about that here in a minute. But where did we come from, Academic Data Science Alliance? So a few years back, I think maybe like 7 years ago now, the Moore Foundation and Sloan Foundations jointly funded 3 data science institutes, essentially with the goal of seeing what could happen if you provided a lot of funding for a data science institute at an academic institution. What could they do? What could that work produce? So those 3 institutes, one was at New York University, one at University of Washington, and one at UC Berkeley. And they all kind of diverged and did their own things. But after about 5 years of that work, maybe more, the funders decided that it was probably best to kind of crack the doors open and say, what could this group do as a bigger community? And that's how ADSA was born. So we've kind of gone from this Moore Sloan data science environments of 3 institutions, and then cracked this wide open to any academic institutions that are working in this space. So we have a few major areas of work. We hold 2 meetings annually. They happen jointly. One is a general purpose data science conference, which we refer to as the ADSA annual meeting. And It's not a data science conference that speaks specifically to a research domain. It's meant to be very cross-cutting, and one of the goals this year and in coming years is going to be to find ways for researchers to talk about tools and methods that cross domain boundaries. So a lot of lateral transfer of information is what we're looking for at the annual meeting. We also, as I said, jointly run what we call the ADSA Leadership Summit. So this is an invitation-only summit for leaders of academic data science initiatives and educational programs. And the goal here is to kind of bring those leaders into a common space and talk through issues that are facing folks commonly across the country. So we're trying to build community among academic data science institute leaders, to share best practices, especially where we face similar challenges and opportunities, and to take collective responsibility in preparing upcoming students and faculty and staff to be data scientists and contribute to the best interests of society. Another area of focus for us is early career support. So data science is a relatively new field. There are a lot of folks coming into faculty positions as data scientists in academia. And it's not uncommon, I keep pushing this button, it's not uncommon for people to, in essence, not really know what it means to have a data scientist on faculty or on staff. And so there are a lot of road bumps for folks who are early in their career in data science, and we're working with our early career researchers and faculty and staff in the community to try to provide kind of a collaborative, peer-powered environment to help folks share expertise and try to take on some of these issues of being an early career researcher in a new field like data science. And then we also have a number of special interest groups and working groups in ADSA. These are driven by the stated interests of the community. So specifically, the areas that we're focused in right now are data science education, diversity, equity, inclusion, ethics, and open research and open scholarship. So we've got interest groups and some working groups in all of those spaces right now. And we are here to talk a little bit about this ethics working group and the products that we've been building over the last year or so. So this conversation emerged. Let me just actually stop for a second. Are there any questions about ADSA, kind of where we come from and what we're doing?
Steve, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
How would you know, like, been invited to the leadership summit, like if there's someone at your institution who's been invited?
Yeah, it's a little bit, it's actually quite tricky because at a lot of institutions, there isn't a specific department or institute or center for data science. And so as we are kind of moving through the landscape and trying to figure out who out there we should be talking to, we're finding that a lot of places have multiple points of contact for data science work that might be happening at the university. So we do our best to identify what seems to be the main point of contact at a university and invite them. The Data Science Leadership Conference is limited to maybe 100, 125 people. So it's relatively small. The goal being that we can get everybody in the room, everybody's talking about the same thing, and everybody's kind of focused in the same area. So we send those invitations out in the summer before the summit. And so if somebody at your institution was invited, the person to try to find would be whoever's in charge of that program or institute at your institution to see if they've been invited or not. But I'll point you all to some resources at the end of the talk about how to get more involved with ADSA. And we can go from there. I can also take questions. Any other questions about what ADSA is and before we move on to the ethics working group. Great. So the ethics working group emerged at our 2019 data science leadership meeting. The people that you see in this courtyard in Santa Fe, New Mexico, are the people that were at that summit. And as I said here, they would not shut up about ethics, right? So there wasn't a single session at this meeting that was specifically about data science ethics, but the topic just kept coming up. And this is actually how we like to run our programming through the years, to identify at our annual meeting these kind of topics that keep emerging, and then to take those and move forward with them in the following year, and see what we can do to address those issues. So ethics kept coming up. There have been a lot of ethics scandals that we've seen. This is one that just came up last week, and you don't have to look very far to find these kind of ethical problems in data science and computer science that probably need to be addressed. And so the data science leadership group decided that we should pull together a ethics working group to talk about, at the time, the idea was to build a code of ethics for data science. Instead, if we can build a code of ethics, then maybe we can all do a better job. So we formed a working group, pulled the folks together, and the first thing the working group said is that nobody wants a code of ethics for data science. So we had to shift our focus, and I'll move forward with this timeline in a little bit more detail here in a second. But we shifted our focus to actually producing products that had an outcome we were seeking. So we are going to talk today about this data science ethos lifecycle. We also spent some time focusing on informational documents that could help research administrators at universities incorporate ethical considerations into their research administration. But that's a separate project that we won't talk too much about. So why a code of ethics? Or rather, why not a code of ethics? So there are plenty of these. These things are out there all over the place for data science, for computer science, for statistics and other fields. And the general sense from the community is that these are great, and they're great for guidelines, but they don't actually do anything. They don't actually, they're not enforced or enforceable. And they're kind of an ethics washing almost of our fields. And so the idea was to say, well, what can we do to actually move the needle on ethics in the field of data science? And one area that emerged in this conversation was training, right? So we have, which makes a lot of sense because we're an academic organization and we do a lot of teaching and training of faculty and staff. So we wanted to look around and see what current training in ethics looked like for data science. And what we found was that primarily ethics in data science curricula is kind of put on as a hat at the end. It's like you talk about doing data science and then you kind of say, oh yeah, and also make sure to consider the ethical bits as kind of an afterthought. And so what we wanted to do was to help people understand where those ethical considerations fit in at every stage of the research lifecycle. So people could think about, what is my responsibility as a data scientist working at an institution? What are the risks I am and I'm not aware of, and so on and so forth. Why the life cycle, right? So as with what we were seeing in data science curriculum, we were seeing these representations of how to do data science with these life cycle diagrams and documents, and almost none of these data science life cycles discuss ethics in any kind of integrated way, or some of them don't discuss ethics at all. And so we were seeing that this life cycle as a model is important to data scientists and data science education. And we wanted to adopt a life cycle like this and try to create a more true to life model of the data science life cycle that shows how societal questions are constitutive part of the day-to-day work of a data scientist, right? That you need to kind of think about these things at every stage as you're going along. And so what we wound up with, and I'll dig in a little bit more on this, what we wound up with essentially is an interactive life cycle tool that allows you to look at the different stages of the data science life cycle through a number of conceptual lenses that kind of contextualize the ethical considerations for each of those stages of the life cycle. So I'm going to walk through this tool real quick, what's planned for the tool, talk about where we're headed next, and then I'm happy to take questions. So this is what the tool looks like. What you're seeing on the screen here. It's an interactive tool. It doesn't actually exist yet. We're in the design and build phase of this tool, so I don't have an interactive version of this to show you, but I'm gonna walk you through some of this. So the area to focus on in this diagram is right here at the top in the menu bar, where you can kind of navigate to the different stages of the research life cycle. You can navigate to these conceptual lenses for how to consider the ethical components of your research. And then there are case studies built out for the tool that help you kind of walk through an actual real world case to see how you can apply these conceptual lenses to the life cycle stages. So the life cycle stages probably look very familiar. We've seen various versions of these life cycles all over the place for quite a while now. So this kind of walks us through everything from data discovery to use of analytical tools, to communication, dissemination, decision making. And so when you navigate to the life cycle stages component of the interactive tool, you're able to click on any of these stages and pop out a discussion about kind of generally speaking what that stage of the life cycle is about and where what kinds of questions you might be asking yourself as you're working through this stage of the research process. And those questions are all or tend to all be framed as in the context of these conceptual lenses, right? So these are ways that our sociologist friends who are on the working group can kind of package perspectives on how we think about a particular research project or a particular phase of the research life cycle. So we have these 4 conceptual lenses: positionality, kind of where you are as a researcher and what your identity is, and how that might affect your research; socio-technical systems, this sort of like intertwining of technological tools and systems with the social fabric of our world, and that those are kind of inseparable. So we have to kind of recognize that those are together. Power, the dynamics of power in society, and the impact that our research might have in that context. And then narrative, sort of understanding at a larger scale where we're coming from and where we're going with research, to sort of contextualize things in time and space. So we have our life cycle stages, we have our conceptual lenses, and when we kind of put those things all together, it's really helpful to think about them in the context of actual case studies. So we have right now 3 case studies that we're building out for the tool as a starting point. So at the time of launch for this tool, there will be 3 case studies in place. One is sort of an introductory case study. It's very simple. It's about using cell phone records for census work. So there are a lot of questions there about permission and representation. then there are two more complex case studies. One is sort of a social case study. It's about a property tax assessment project in Cook County, which is where Chicago is, and some revelations that came out of that project about race in Chicago and the impact of, or the potential impact of those property tax assessment methods on different parts of society. And then the third case study we're going to produce is a more complex environmental case study. So this is about clean drinking water, which is a hot topic. Hot topic is kind of a terrible way to say it, but it was a big topic a few years back with the drinking water situation in Flint, and then it turns out across the country. And the goal, we think, as we move past initial launch, is to offer an opportunity for people to provide additional case studies that might be, of interest to folks in a specific research domain or who are looking at specific types of research problems. So where are we now? We've worked with some great folks at UC Berkeley to pull together an initial design for the interactive tool. We're working with our working group and some other organizations outside of ADSA to finalize content for the interactive tools and case studies. And then right now we have about 4 or 5 instances of piloting the tool. So 3 individual classroom pilots happened at the end of the last academic year. And then we've had 1 workshop that was taught at UC Berkeley using the tool to kind of give like a 2-hour crash course in this work. And then we're running another workshop similar to that one at the Adsen annual meeting in November. And then where are we headed? So as I mentioned earlier, we're right now at the point of seeking funding for the build of that interactive tool. Web work and programming is not inexpensive, so we're looking around for funding sources for that work. And then we're also starting to talk about, as I mentioned, building a contribution framework for new case studies. So thinking about how individuals or research groups or classes might be able to contribute new case studies to the tool. Also thinking about how people might offer examples of curriculum that they've built around the tool. And then we're looking for further pilots and adopters moving into the coming school year, and seeing from those pilots and adopters how we might improve the tool or modify it into the future. So that's essentially my quick rundown of this ethics tool that we're putting together at the Academic Data Science Alliance. The folks on the right side of this slide comprise, most of the people working on the working group. We have a few other folks who've been involved, but this is the core of the group. And I'm happy to take questions about ADSA, about the Ethos Lifecycle tool, or anything else really at this point.
So feel free to unmute or put your question in the chat and we can ask it for you. So Brian, we'll see you.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me okay?
You're on.
So Steve,
Hey.
Because I run into problems with untangling what data science is from data management, because people constantly conflate those. I'm just kind of curious with these case studies, has it been difficult to delineate case studies where maybe the research design, the data collection, the types of data that are going into the analysis, if that's the approach, are legit, and then you're looking at things that are really more in the purview of what a data scientist does, like, well, this AI tool may not be, or this modeling may not be appropriate, but we're going to assume the data is good. It's what we're doing. Has that been a challenge, or how do you approach that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main challenge, that's a great question. I think that the main challenge that we have in that space is that it's hard to come up with 3 case studies that represent the kind of spectrum of problems you might run into, right? And so I believe with both the Cook County case study and the cell phone records case study, there's an element of those case studies that talks about the data, how the data is acquired, data permissions and things like that. But I think that they both focus a little bit more on the implications of implementation of a tool that predicts what property value prices should be, for example. So we do try to talk about these sort of data management-y issues in some of those early stages of the life cycle, but it's not always easy to find a case study where you have data management issues and data analysis issues and so on and so forth, because that would really be a disastrous project, I think.
Yeah, I wasn't really thinking you would want to try to talk a lot about, pure data management issues. I mean, I'm just wondering if there's a risk of it becoming more of a, well, the black box of AI has a lot of issues and we need to figure out how to approach it ethically and how to ground truth it to make sure it's, like sentencing guidelines where they were generated through some kind of system that is not equitable.
Right.
Because I can understand that end of it, but I'm just thinking there's lots of other elements that could be considered in terms of ethics with data science, and so you maybe have too broad a palette of things to choose from for use cases.
Yeah, I think that we do, and that's part of the reason that what we're looking forward to is an opportunity for folks in the community to contribute case studies back, and not that they need to be complete case studies, but you might say, here's a case where it's really important to focus on the data management aspect of the project and what happened or what went wrong with data management in this project, even if the rest of the research process went fine. But yeah, it's challenging. There's so many cases of unethical research or research mismanagement out there that it's hard to really narrow down exactly which ones to grab onto.
It's a great idea. I'm looking forward to seeing it.
Yeah,
so,
perfect.
Thanks.
Are there any other questions? I have one if somebody doesn't have one.
Yeah.
So it seems to me that, and maybe my question is very simple, that what you're addressing in this conceptual lenses is applicable to anybody doing research.
Right.
So how do you, I guess I'm not so skilled in like big data tools and things, but I could definitely benefit from, this information. And how do you kind of help navigate when the problem reaches that scale where you really need to be in the data science part of it?
Yeah, so you've highlighted the number one problem, well, one of the problems with this project, which is that we're calling it a data science ethos lifecycle tool. But you're right, it really is applicable to research much more broadly. Why are we focused on data science? Well, that's because of the organization we are. And if we were to try to kind of trot out some new life cycle for all of research, that would be even more daunting than putting together a new life cycle for data science. But as I mentioned before, what we're hoping to see in the future is contribution of case studies back to the tool. And I imagine that what we'll wind up with if we start to get contributions back, we'll wind up with something that looks more like a life cycle tool that is applicable across types of research, not just for data science. But yeah, I mean, I think the tool itself will be applicable to training and reference for researchers of all stripes moving forward.
I know there's a lot of interest in, like on my campus, where like training undergraduates who are not necessarily in traditional disciplines that would use it. And so I'm assuming hopefully the case studies are going to reflect, you know, those in humanities and English and, you know, all those disciplines, so that you could use them, you know, in these, like, so that all students could benefit from this.
Yeah. I think one of the big issues that we have right now with our limited set of pilots is that they're actually all geared towards undergraduate education, and specifically, I think the pilots that they've run at Berkeley are for this kind of freshman level data science class that they teach. And so what we actually don't have a lot of right now is piloting at the graduate student level, or say within a research lab that wants to kind of walk through a tool to remind lab members in the lab itself how to consider ethics in the research process. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, or it might just be rambling.
Yeah, that Berkeley course is kind of a model for what we're doing here. People reference all the time. So
absolutely.
There is one question in the chat from Chris, and it says, are you working with Institutional Review Board in developing criteria?
What types of criteria do you mean? If you want to unmute or type, I can read it in the chat too.
Well, I don't actually work in an academic institution, but I know that most research has to go through some sort of IRB process. And they are the owners of ethics in a lot of research review processes that I've been involved in. So it seems like if you were talking about ethics, are you working with other entities on campuses that already have responsibilities?
Yeah, that's a great question, and this touches you know, on this lifecycle tool, but I think it maybe more importantly touches on the other product of this ethics working group, which is a set of recommendations for research administrators to help them think about how to think about ethics more broadly than through the lens of the IRB or other regulatory frameworks, right? So one of the big problems that we have in research ethics right now is that we have these regulatory frameworks that are hard enough to enforce because, you know, IRB offices honestly on campuses tend to be underfunded and so on and so forth. And so you have these offices that are very focused on the regulatory aspects of what they're doing, but are not stepping back and thinking more broadly beyond regulation, how they should be thinking about what research maybe should or should not happen on our campuses. Well, yeah, I'll stop there. Does that answer your question? Oh dear.
Well, I have less a question and more just a thought. So we had one of the authors of Data Feminism come earlier in the year.
Great.
Yeah, it was a fabulous presentation. But like one of the things that's been sticking in my mind is the art project about missing data sets, like data sets that should probably exist but don't. I'm just like, I'm wondering how we could work that into ethics.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I think that it would be interesting to build a case study around a case that essentially can't move forward because the data doesn't exist to answer the questions, right? And I'm thinking specifically right now about, over the last couple of years, our awareness has really focused on police shootings in the US. And there's been a lot of conversation about whether we even have data sets that allow us to understand how often this is happening. And I think that's maybe an example of what you're talking about, right? We could start in that research lifecycle at data acquisition and then just stop immediately and say, we don't even have the data, for this question, which does, I think, bring up some ethical questions. Why don't we collect that data? Who benefits from us not collecting data like that, and who would benefit if we did collect that data? So I think those are all great questions. It'd be interesting to learn more about these data sets that don't exist. Brian's got an example. Yeah, like it's a perfect example, Brian.
So just as a plug for a future call, it's in November, we're going to have someone talk about the National Criminal Justice database from ICPSR. So kind of like as a follow-on to like, hey, if you do manage to get some of these data missing data sets, here's a place to publicize them.
Right.
So I see you're providing us the URL to the Academic Data Science Alliance.
Yes, so that's the URL to our website. There's some information there about our working groups and interest groups, about our conferences, the early career group, and then how to get onto our communication channels. We have a newsletter that goes out every couple of weeks. And we have all the, Slack and Twitter and things like that. So you can find all of that information at academicdatascience.org. And we'd love to see you over there.
Yeah, it's a wonderful newsletter that goes out, highly entertaining as well as informative, usually.
Yeah, we've got a great crew of volunteer editors that put together some of that work. Brian asks, is there anyone in particular I should point data science faculty to? Brian, I would point people to the website. If you're interested in pointing them to somebody that they could talk to, that could either be me or Michaela Parker, who's our executive director, and our contact information is at the website. You'll be able to find us there.
Well, if there aren't any other questions, Steve, I really appreciate your time today.
Sure.
Hopefully you'll get a bump in your subscriptions to your newsletter, and we'll visit the website, and we'll be able to attend some of those summits and conferences. That'd be really great.
Great. And as we move forward with this Ethos lifecycle tool, and especially as we get towards release, I'll make sure to reach back out to this community to let you know so folks can take a look.
Okay.
And for those still on the call, if anybody is interested in piloting the tool, in the coming academic year, please reach out to me and we can talk through what that would look like.
Okay, that's much appreciated.
Sure.
All right, well, everybody, thanks for attending today, and the recording will go up on the CARC YouTube channel, so you'll be able to see it there, and the call doc will be available as well through the website. So look for those informations with the links that are there. Thank you.